Are really excited to have you here with us today for this conversation on decision making in community building. Nate and Ian are two guys that I reach out to a lot about just what this work looks like. And you're going to hear from this webinar why I'm constantly reaching out to them. And hopefully, this isn't becoming like 18 people constantly reaching out to them with your questions, but it may be. But they are just bringing some really great experience working in neighborhoods in their cities in Wichita and in Chicago, both kind of from different perspectives and different positions. But this is something that they have thought a lot about, that they've been experimenting in. And it's something that I think, as many of us are stepping into this role, right, and bringing neighbors together through block parties, through social gatherings, uh, that that's a really energizing part. But then having people collaborate to make decisions is typically where there can be some tension, or even just how do we get started, right? A lot of folks want to be collaborative. And I think we're going to talk a bit about the tyranny of structurelessness, right? We just kind of turn it over to the group and assume that we all have those civic skills to collaborate and have thoughtful dialogue and conflict resolution, but sometimes we don't, right? And so that's where we're diving into today. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nate and Ian to introduce themselves and then to walk us through this topic a bit more.
After you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. Go ahead, Nate.
Oh, sure. I'll go. Hey, everybody. My name's Nate Tubbs. It's really, really good to be with you all. Great to see some familiar faces here as well as some new faces. I'm based in Chicago. I work for an organization called Together Chicago and do a lot of trainings and organizing here, and also very active in my own neighborhood association on the west side called the Island Civic Association. So really good to be with you all. I'll be back in a minute. Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. And thank you, Megan. Super excited to be here with you all. I am here in Wichita, Kansas with the neighboring movement. And thank you. I see DeQuavion, a message in the chat. I do work with the neighboring movement and working here with Christopher Swanson, who's also there on the chat today. We're training people in asset-based community development. We are working in secular on a secular side and a faith-based side, working with churches, individuals, other nonprofits, neighborhood associations, all of that. And yeah, decision making is something that I have been wrestling with for a really long time through many years of community organizing work. And so, what we'll talk about today kind of builds on some of the experiences that I have had in lots of different spaces, but also that I've been trying to experiment with in my own neighborhood here in Wichita, Kansas. And Nate and I will both share a little bit about our own neighborhoods here in a moment. All right, so we are talking about decision making and governance in community building work. And I want to start with a question for you all. One more question just to throw into the chat. We've seen your emojis, and so now we're going to ask you just to say a little bit more. Oh, and Savannah, thank you for putting tyranny of structurelessness in the chat. That's great. So yeah, just a little bit more. So when you think about the community building work that you've been a part of, how are decisions actually made? How have you usually seen that go? So in other words, back up your emojis a little bit by throwing some answers into the chat. Okay, we got Robert's rules and majority, consensus. Ooh, a duocracy. Yeah, I like that term. Very cool. As Joel, a small team of people, often with corporate sounding language, steering committee, leadership council. Sure, yeah. Ooh, Andrea, okay. A few people at the top vetoing things. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hello.
What else we got? Consent. Okay, with consensus in votes in favor or oppose. Yeah, opposed. Oh yeah. We're going to talk about all these. So Jennifer, yeah, a few people who are active just doing what they think is best. And Savannah, I see consent-based decision making. All right. Very cool. We're going to talk about that a lot. And Laura, the club or top leaders make the decision masked in voting. Oh, yes, that can happen. Yep, very common. Answering the question, what's in it for them? Hmm. Mm-hmm. And consensus under social pressure. Oh, that one hits me from way back. Uh, Lots of thrown out ideas, usually with a vocal leader saying, "Well, should we just do this thing?" Yep, Chris, I resonate. Wow, y'all, this is great. This is actually like super, super helpful feedback to know kind of where we're all at. So I am hoping that we can kind of touch on some things throughout this that address some of those experiences. Um, and yeah, I think if I'll pass it over to Nate from here.
Thanks, Ian. So love what you all shared in the chat. That is so real and appreciate you sharing that. So I just want to kick us off with asking this question of like, why does decision making matter? Not just the making of decisions, but like as in the product, but the how we go about it. Why does that really matter? And I can feel through your emojis and comments that it does matter to you that you are doing work in community and the way decisions are made does matter. Um, so I want to start with this thought that the way that we work together determines what we can produce. All right. So decisions can get done, but are we producing the culture, the buy-in, the results that we want to see? Good intentions are not enough in community building work. We need good governance. How many of you have worked in a scenario where you embark on a new idea or project with good intentions, and then you haven't worked out any of the details of how you actually work together or how you make decisions? And then you can fall into a lot of pitfalls through that. So we do need good intentions, but we need to marry it with good governance. Um, this is a phrase that learned when I took the Sociocracy for All practitioner course. They use a statement, behavior is determined by the prevailing form of decision making. Think about that for a second. Behavior in groups that are trying to work together and trying to make decisions together is often determined by the prevailing form of decision making. So the way we make decisions can influence how people are actually behaving and acting in our organizations and in our neighborhoods. So I want to go through some of the prevailing forms of decision making so you can start to locate yourself in those, maybe in your current experiences or in your past experiences. But let's name what some of those are so that we can think critically about them, and some of the pros and cons of some of these different major forms of decision making. So I won't take much time on this, but just a comparison of some of the common decision making methods. Okay, so first off, we have autocracy. I hope none of you are doing this in your community building work, but I think you can resonate with how this does exist in our world and how some groups, organizations, businesses, countries perhaps operate in this way, that the people on the top, the people with the authority, they make the decisions. It's top down. It's fast because you can just command it to happen and it has to happen. And some of the challenges of that would be a lack of feedback, a lack of participation and choice. In some of your comments in the chat, I was feeling that some of you are saying when decisions are made and just an edict goes out, okay, we have to do this. You don't feel like you've participated in that choice. You don't have that shared buy-in with that decision. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. Another prevailing form of decision making is democracy. So we see this in a lot of nonprofits. This is a lot of voting and authority. Robert's rules was mentioned here in the chat, voting. And so who decides things in a democracy? The voting members do. And this is easy to scale when you have larger numbers of people. And some of the challenges of this is that certain topics can get politicized, and you can have the tyranny of the majority, right? So you can have the 51% who gets their way, and you can have the dissatisfied minority, the 49. And we see that in our world as well, and you likely see that in many of your community building efforts. Another option would be no governance system. This is where we have not defined how we work together. We have not made rules. We haven't written things down. It's unclear who makes decisions. How many of you have ever participated in a no governance system organization in your neighborhood? So it's unclear, but it can be flexible and it can be useful when you're forming, when you're starting off. You know, you have a shared vision and you're trying to figure things out, but you definitely can't stay here forever because it's going to be unclear. There can be abuse of power. It can be hard to formalize things later after you've gotten into these different ways of operating together. But that's another prevailing option here. Whole group consensus is a fourth option here. So this is trying to get everyone to agree on the same thing, to say, hey, we all agree on this decision. And you have to define who is a part of that group that needs to agree in order for a decision to be made. This is a way to include a lot of ideas. So that's a good thing. You can include everyone, but it's hard to make changes. And you have the tyranny of the minority, the few people who maybe hold out on consensus and say, well, I don't fully agree. And this can be slow. This can take time to try to bring a group of people to consensus, no matter the size, whether it's 5 people or 50 people. This can be difficult, but many people want to see consensus because it can feel really good when you feel like you have that. Okay, and then lastly, and Ian's going to go more into this one in particular, is a model called sociocracy, and this is consent-based decision making. This is one form of consent-based decision making, and there's a difference here between consent and consensus, and Ian's going to go more into that a little later. But this is where small groups of people in circles are commissioned to make decisions about certain things. Many voices can be heard. You can build trust and listening. And one of the challenges of it is that you have to be committed to the process of this. And so I want to show all these, not to say, oh, this is the very best and always what you should use, but that there's some serious pros and cons to the way we operate, even in the type of group and the group size that we are working in. And so this is a tough choice as to how you want to operate in your community work. But I think it's helpful to just name some of these, and you can probably locate yourself in multiples of these in some of the groups that you're a part of. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to Ian in a second, but I want to say this. Each method of governance can get things done, right? But are your community building organizations and associations, are they producing the community that you want to see? That's a key question you need to ask. I've been in a situation where you set out to say, we want to build connection in our neighborhood. But then the way we actually operated and made decisions was causing disconnection in the neighborhood. So is the model actually creating the community you want to see? If your vision for your community work is shared power or increasing participation or collective efficacy, whatever your goals are, is your model producing that? And if it's not, you should question it. You should be willing to adjust it and tweak it. But we have to focus on what are we really trying to build here? And again, assuming you all are trying to build local community connection and relationships, there's that element of trust and relationality and participation. And you need a model that will support producing those behaviors in your work. All right, back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Nate. You set this up beautifully. This is the question that I am asking myself all the time is, yes, I want to get things done. Absolutely. Like I need a system that will allow me to actually achieve the goals that I set out to do. But it's really important to me, especially in asset-based work, if we're trying to activate everyone's gifts and let people's kind of power shine through in a neighborhood, then I want a system of decision making that allows that sharing power. So is it possible to both share power while getting things done? And I want to point to a book that argues, and a whole uh, theory and practice that's actually happening, that argues that yes, it is possible. And it's so this book is called Many Voices, One Song, and as you can see, it has that Sociocracy for All logo, which is one of a few different organizations that is has a system for kind of certifying sociocracy trainers. But the idea is that we're building shared power with sociocracy. It's many voices singing one song. So let's go into what that, a little bit of the history and kind of what that looks like in practice. So sociocracy is it's both a theory of governance that is aiming to create psychologically safe environments, right? And so you can see under these bullet points here, psychologically safe means that people feel like they are actually heard, like what they say matters. They have an effective say. So in this case, they're trying to build an egalitarian or organizations where people feel a sense of equality, but also organizations in which people can make productive decisions to get things done, right? And so if we go back to the kind of history here, there was a couple in the 1920s and 30s. They were a Dutch couple, and they ran a pretty radical school. It was really cool. The kids got lots of say in decision making based off of Quaker principles. And so this school had a student there named Gerard Hindenburg, who later went on to take over his parents' electrical engineering firm. In the 1970s and 80s, he's experimenting. How do I apply the principles that I learned in school to a massive engineering firm? And it's really cool the way he started to think, like bring in kind of tools from mechanics into this structure. Then an American named John Buck, a friend of mine, in the 1990s or 80s and 90s, went to the Netherlands and learned sociocracy, also known as dynamic governance or deep democracy, and he brought this back to the United States. And so today, you have millions of people in associations, businesses, governments, every scale you can imagine, practicing sociocracy. And what it boils down to is that it's the people who associate together are steering the ship together, right? They're steering together toward the aim of their organization or the aim of their one small part of an organization. And so if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to show very quickly some of the ways this is being used. As I mentioned, very large scale, very small scale. So the large scale, you can see this little box here that says children, inclusive neighborhood children's parliaments. So in India, at least hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of children are practicing small decisions at the scale of about 30 kids, deciding actual things like how to, like building bridges, or what library needs to be built, like real stuff, through sociocracy on their blocks. And then we have things like just small scale co-ops, right? Or schools that are practicing sociocracy, all the way to big manufacturing firms. There's some government, small like city governments that are experimenting with this, or departments within universities. Co-housing does it all the time. It's a very popular model in co-housing. And then if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about nonprofits as well, because I know a lot of you kind of are in a nonprofit context. And so there is a model that has emerged called a worker self-directed nonprofit. And you can see here, it talks about circles. That is a term that we use in sociocracy. So in worker self-directed nonprofits, they almost all use this system. It's a form of nonprofit. It's like combining cooperative, like a worker-owned cooperative, and a nonprofit model together. And they're all using something very similar to sociocracy. They don't usually use the name, but it's basically sociocracy. And remember, you don't have to use the name to practice the principles. So we'll go to the next slide, and we'll look at what are we actually practicing with sociocracy. So this visual here, I think, is pretty helpful. Essentially, you can imagine. Actually, Nate, real quickly, will you go back to the governance slide where you were listing all the different types of governance? The very last one with sociocracy there too. Okay, right there. So you can see this in this little tiny snapshot here, a whole bunch of circles. This is one like an organization broken up into a whole bunch of different circles. And so going back to the slide we were just on, yeah, you can imagine that one organization is going to be divided up into smaller groups, right? We already do this with committees or working groups or whatever. So we call those circles, and we're going to entrust decisions to these circles. And so a circle is a defined team of people that is working together toward their circle's aim. And every circle is going to have an aim, and essentially an aim is just the concrete actions that the circle takes together. So what is it actually doing? Each circle also has, so it has an aim, and each circle also has a domain. A domain is a description of what this circle can actually make decisions about. In other words, where does its authority lie? And so each circle is going to be given autonomy over its domain. And then the circles are going to be linked together across an organization through two people that are going to be members of both circles. And that ensures that information flows, that ensures that power is balanced as well, right? And then finally, so we've got the circles, we've got the linking, and now we go to decisions. Decisions are flexible, and they're going to be made through consent, right? They're going to be made good enough for now, safe enough to try, right? So that shows you kind of the flexible nature. In other words, we're coming to decisions that there's no strong objection among the people. It's not full consensus where everyone has to agree. It's just good enough for now, safe enough to try. And we'll talk more about that. But as these decisions are flexible, they can also constantly evolve through feedback. So we decide something's good enough, we try it out, then we build in lots of ways of getting feedback, including there's a review date built into every policy and every role elected. These are just very simple things you can try. A review date means that we have to come back to it. It's not forever. And so basically what we're doing is we're ensuring that everyone consents to decisions in their circle, and we're trusting circles with autonomy. So the decisions and the action are going to be decentralized to the lowest level that they're necessary to be decentralized to. So the lowest level possible. Okay, so let's like zoom in. So if we were going to show up at a meeting with sociocracy, what would we see? The first thing we'd notice is that sociocracy is taken a whole bunch of care to make sure that every person has a voice. It's trying to level the playing field so that each person can be fully heard. And so one way that it does this is speaking in rounds. So we're going to go around the circle multiple times to discuss a topic. And in each round, everyone has a chance to speak, right? And so except for when we actually make a decision, every round, you're either given the chance to speak or pass. But we even consider passing a form of participation, right? We're hearing from you. When it comes to a decision-making round, everybody has to kind of end up consenting, right? Or objecting. But everybody participates. So then the next slide just talks about why rounds. Well, first off, I want to say, if you're just freaking out and you're like, okay, that seems like it would be really hard to just speak one at a time. Remember, the consent principle is really the most important part. So if a circle were to decide by consent that, hey, we want to go into just iterative brainstorming and just bounce ideas off of each other without rounds, that's okay. But we but the group has to consent. The default is rounds, and that gives us equivalence, which means that each person's voice and their contribution is going to be given equal weight in decision making. So it's not just the loudest voices that will be heard, which also gives you kind of the freedom to know, hey, I'm going to get my time to speak, and so I don't have to fight for my turn. So you get your time to think. There's clarity of and structure, right? And then it ultimately saves time over time. And so it might not feel like that at first, but when you do rounds, the creative ideas start to surface sooner. People are listening more generously because they're knowing, again, hey, I'm going to have my chance to speak. And then the quiet people can hold as much sway in the meeting as the vocal ones. And also, a lot of times you get clarity on what the next slide will kind of tell us. You're going to get clarity on what you're actually talking about. So it's not just people shouting out ideas before we even know what are we talking about, right? So the first round in a sociocratic decision-making process is always going to be, the first couple rounds are always going to be like deciding what are we even talking about. So we're not just jumping right into shouting out solutions. We want to make sure everybody understands the scope of the topic. And so we're going to try to spend a couple rounds getting clarity. Hey, what are we talking about? What angles do we need to look at the issue from? And then like the next slide is what dimensions of the issue do we need to make sure that we cover in our solution? And that's really cool because you can have a big you can kind of go around and you're brainstorming what are we looking for in a decision, and then when you actually make the decision, you can go back and compare it to the list of dimensions and make sure everything is covered, so you make sure that your decision is comprehensive and is meeting people's needs, right? So now round 3, once you've kind of got clarity, you're going to start brainstorming solutions and drafting a proposal. And then round 4, that is our consent or objection round. And I really like this diagram Nate added because it shows that everyone has their preferences, right? This is the thing that like this is my favorite idea ever. This is what in mediation world, we call it my position, right? This is my preference. And oftentimes, when we envision consensus, this is what we want, everybody to agree on the preference. But what we see is that everyone also has a range of tolerance. This is a decision that, again, might not be my favorite, but I'm willing to live with it. And the consent is anything within that range of tolerance, which would include our preferences as well, right? An objection is that anything falls outside of that. So if you go to the next slide, an objection is a reasoned statement. So it's not just like, I hate it, or whatever, right? It's a reasoned statement of what could go wrong and why, if we make this decision, if we move forward with this proposal, it will hinder our ability to carry out our circle's aim. So it's got a specific definition, right? But what that's doing is, remember that this was created, at least in large part, by an engineer who's thinking about mechanics. And he's thinking, okay, if you drive a car and your gas gauge has an objection, right? It sends a signal that the car has to listen to. Like the car cannot go forward if the gas gauge is saying, ping, 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 you're out of gas, right? So it's this feedback loop. Well, he said, hey, people need that too. We need something to where across all levels of an organization, if we hear somebody says, hey, I object, then everybody has to stop and listen to that objection. And that's really important. That's why objections are not feared in sociocracy. They're actually harvested. We talk about harvesting objections as something like we're seeking, because they're going to help us build proposals that are more resilient. So there are a few ways you can respond to a proposal. You're not stuck there, right? All you got to do is either you can modify the proposal to find something that would help meet that person's need or their interest behind their position, right? You can try shortening the term. So, hey, would you be able to consent if we just tried this out for 2 months instead of 6 months, right? Or measuring the concern. Hey, what are the warning signals that if you see these warning signals, that tells us, hey, we need to pause and come back to this, right? Like, can we move forward as long as we've got these warning signals that we're paying attention to? If we start to see this thing your concern is being bared out in reality, then we need to stop back and come back, right? And remember that there's always a review date as well. So that can help people get through a lot of objections and get to consent, while making sure that everyone's actually listened to, right? It doesn't just stop the process and you block it, right, in sociocracy or in consensus, and then it's done, right? So I guess that's an important thing. Um, and then you celebrate because it's usually a co-creative process, and you've gone on a journey together. Really quickly, I just want to point out how is this different than voting? And I just want to name, like, in voting, where we're like casting votes or bringing emotion. A lot of times it's black or white, and people's reservations aren't attended to. They don't quite fit in. With consent, we can move fast, knowing that, hey, we can test things out, we can come back. We don't have to love the idea or the nomination if we're talking about a person being nominated for a role, but will it harm our ability to carry out our aim? So there's a standard there. There's another really cool part of sociocracy that we won't get too into today, but it's a selection process. So you use the consent process to create, to basically decide who's going to fill a role. So instead of a 51% to 49% election, we're looking for elections that unite, that are energizing, not polarizing and draining. And the way that we do that in sociocracy is we co-create the role, its qualifications, its responsibilities in a whole circle, and then we nominate people to fill those, that we end up all consenting to. So the process kind of takes a little bit of the majority principle oftentimes, where like the majority nomination might get the proposal, but then we're going to consent or object just as we normally would. And so when you're finally consented to, you feel like, hey, the whole circle thinks that I'm good enough for now and safe enough to try. It's much more of a mandate to like go ahead and act, which is a really cool feeling as well.
Mm.
So how has this played out? I'll just give a real quick story from my own neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood in Riverside, in Wichita, Kansas, and there's like a micro neighborhood that we've kind of realized we've kind of co-created. It's a 2 block by 4 block area. We call the 2 by 4, and that all started with a lot of people doing a lot of different, small block parties, inviting neighbors over to dinner, all that stuff. But where it really took off is we got some neighbors together at this local coffee shop here, and we read The Connected Community by John McKnight and Cormac Russell together. It was about 10 neighbors. Excellent book. It's an asset-based community development book. And I read that all the time with my cohorts at work, but what had never happened before is I had never done it with actual neighbors. And we were like looking out the window and applying the ideas. Hey, that would go really well right there, right? Like it just was so immediate. And so I realized that people were coming up with all these ideas, and I wrote them all down. I went back through the notes and made sure that everybody's idea got to in some sort of idea bank, because I didn't want us to forget about them. And then I proposed that we use the selection process from sociocracy that I just mentioned. That's used to choose between a few different options. So we usually use that to choose between people, but you can also use it to choose between ideas, right? And so we use the sociocratic process to prioritize 3 ideas, 1 per month, that like we do together. And then after the 4th month, we come back and reflect on it, and now we do 3 more ideas. So this is kind of how we organize using sociocracy in my neighborhood, and all sorts of ideas have come of it. We've done another book club. We've done a cookie exchange, a tour of homes. We've done a kayaking block party. We've done emergency response training, and a garage sale. And we're about to convene the process again. We use sociocracy, like a just true sociocracy rounds, to come up with a micro grant together, to apply for, that's going to involve if we get the grant, that we're going to co-create a flag together that will be our 2x4 flag, and all the neighbors will have, we'll try to get these out to as many neighbors as possible to kind of help shape the culture there. And Nate's got a story as well. I'll let you take it over, Nate.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Man, you did such a good job sharing all this, and I love that example from your neighborhood. Um, a bit of my story, very briefly. My neighborhood is called the Island. It's also a very small area on the west side of the city of Chicago. Uh, Funny enough, it's a 3 block by 4 block area, so maybe we should call it the 3 by 4, Ian. But anyways, we've been doing a lot of community organizing here, and I'll just be honest, like if you're anything like me, you're hearing these principles and ideas of sociocracy, and you're like, wow, it sounds amazing. But what does that actually look like in my actual neighborhood, right? So I will say we have a civic association that functions very democratically, Robert's Rules of Order and all that kind of stuff. And it's a larger number of people than what you might see in these circles. And that organization, it will take some time if we're going to start implementing some of these types of things. Whereas we have another group that's a mutual aid organization. It's already a group of people that is, 4 to 8 people. And that's a space where we've been able to implement more quickly some of the ideas of sociocracy. Again, that phrase, good enough for now, safe enough to try, speaking in rounds, doing consent voting. And we are just lightly trying to move into some of those practices. And so this isn't something that you can just like flip a switch and all of a sudden your organization is poof, you're sharing power and you're making consent decisions. Like it's actually practices that you need to work on and develop over time. And it's probably going to take a while, especially in a larger organization. If you're in a group that is already small and already a bit unclear on how you function, there's probably a little more immediate opportunity there to implement some of these things. So, my story in my neighborhood is like we're finding our places to implement some of these practices, trying to get more buy-in from other people. Hey, would you want to read this book too? Would you want to? And even personally, I was like, I got to learn more about this. So I did go through Sociocracy for All's practitioner course, and I've done the level 1 training of that. And they've got some great trainings, certification process, all of that. So I'd highly encourage you to study this, learn this, read about it, and try to find those places you can implement some of these practices. So with that in mind, we're going to open up for questions in a minute, but just want to challenge you. What are you going to take back with you from this conversation today? Here's some suggestions, perhaps. Things that you can try out in your own neighborhood. This first phrase, you've heard us say it several times. This is so helpful. What decision can we make that is good enough for now and safe enough to try? We can change it later, we can review it later, but could we make a decision, like Ian said, for the next 2 months instead of for the next 2 years? That feels so daunting, right? So limiting the terms, making it simple, approachable, and winnable, right? What's a decision we can make that we could get a win, make it small, make it quicker? Another thing you can try is speaking in rounds. Like, what are the spaces where you could just start doing that? Hey, why don't we take a round and just make sure everyone has equal voice as we respond to this topic or to this idea? Circles. I put 5 to 7 here, but the other stuff said 4 to 8. So, but the point is, you can do certain things in smaller groups that you cannot do in larger groups, right? It's just not possible maybe to do a round with 50 people, and it's just gonna, so part of this breaking into circles, like Ian said earlier, is to really give people that specific aim that they can see themselves working on, that they have vision for, and that they have the authority to take action on. So yes, many people call this committees or subgroups or whatever, but how could you adopt some of this language of circles and aims and domains of authority? That's something you could try out. And then lastly, this idea of proposals. This is something we've done a lot in my neighborhood. Someone comes up and says, we should do this or we should do that. What I say to them now is I say, hey, work that into a proposal. Make it into a little proposal, bring it to the next meeting. And that way we have something to respond to. You've kind of fleshed it out. Maybe a couple people work on the proposal together. It's hard to work on a proposal with 20 people, but it's really nice actually to work on a proposal with 2 people. and then kind of bring that back to the group and get consent for it. It requires that fleshing it out, that buy-in, and that sort of thing. So those are some things that you can try and take home with you. I think we just have a couple other slides. I think you'll get this deck afterwards, so I won't belabor this, but there's a couple links here. These are links from the Sociocracy for All course that I took this past year, a presentation that my group did, and then a link to a bunch of resources where you can learn more. And then this is a slide with my information, Ian's information, and you'll be able to get this whole deck later on. So thank you. That's our presentation, and like we'd love to respond to any questions as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nate and Ian. That was wonderful. And I was chatting with them before the call because this really relates to some of the work I'm doing in my neighborhood. But it was so cool even to hear that presentation. Part of what we're experimenting with in decision making with bilingual groups. And so a lot of the folks in our neighborhood are either English or Spanish speaking. And so it's funny to see actually like the recommendations we got were almost circles that are language based. Because if you're trying to either object or consent to a decision in your second language, that's really hard. And so I think like a lot of the work that you guys talked about and practice just shared were just so timely for the work we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead. We've had a couple questions in the chat. If you have something coming up, go ahead, throw it in the chat as well, and we'll try to get to all of them. But I wanted to ask first, Savannah had a couple questions. But she had the question of, I'm seeing groups of 4 to 8 people on the sociocracy slide. If there's less than 4 people, can you still do this? Or is there a Dunbar's number thing happening here?
Hmm. Yeah, I can respond to that. And hey, Savannah, what's up? Good to see you. Yeah, my hunch on that 4 to 8 people is not that it's a hard and fast rule, like, oh, you can't do these things with three or you can't do it with nine. But there is something to be said about what Ian said earlier, that idea of equivalence and effectiveness. What's the size that you're able to work at where you can actually all have equivalence in your voice and sharing decisions and actually get stuff done? And to me, that's the sweet spot that many experts in the field have highlighted as a recommended size that can bring that balance of equivalence and effectiveness.
I'll just add, there was a time when my wife and I just had our brand new baby, and there were some decisions we had to make about like just, how we were gonna handle sleep and stuff like that. And I actually just said, hey, what if we just did, we'll just go back and forth to make sure that that we're both being heard. So we kind of did some rounds, and I actually started by like, hey, let's just start like just taking just let's just throw out a bunch of questions and not have our solutions yet. Just what's on our mind, and then what are the things that we need to cover with this, and kind of did it a little bit more informally. I don't think I even wrote anything down, but I was just like, or I yeah, we were on a walk, so but I just kind of kept these things in mind. We ended up doing it a few more times in other cases, just as a couple, right? And there are some helpful resources from Sociocracy for All about like sociocracy in families, sociocracy in relationships. So I think it can happen on a smaller scale. It can feel like a little bit weird. So you just have to be kind of intentional about it. It just so when it's such a small scale, it can be just such a small group. It can just be much easier to feel like, hey, we'll just break the rounds, blah 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 blah. So it just everybody knowing what you're getting into, I think is helpful, and that's why it's good, for everybody to work together, and in a small group, everybody can get some sort of training on this. And even Sociocracy for All even has group training, like your group can, for a smallish, relatively small fee, like your group can do a group training together, and then have a coach that kind of coaches you through the process. So.
Mhm. I'll just add one more thing there, Ian, is that I think the other reason for these small circles is this idea of multiplying the work. and not trying, you don't try to grow a circle to be 12 and 15 and 40 people. You're trying to say, hey, there's only so much that we can each give our attention to. What if we break into two circles? What if we break into three circles and bring attention to these different things that we can actually go be effective in? That's part of the philosophy here, as well as the multiplication of capacity rather than the kind of accumulation of a capacity in single groups.
All right, thank you. All right, one more question from Savannah. What have you two or anyone else here found helps people build more capacity for showing up to governance and the potential conflict that might come about?
Mm.
Hmm. Oof, good question. I would definitely say some people just like they don't like governance or meetings. They don't want to be a part
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff, but they do still have ideas and things that they care about. And so I think when the aim of a circle or a group aligns with something that someone's passionate about, I think that's the best way for them to get into the work and you know, you can get really technical with this sociocracy stuff. Like when I took the course, it can be really technical. You got to follow everything, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so some people are wired to really follow the process and do it all by the book and all this. But those little principles that help people see that their voice was wanted, their idea was valued, and that the thing they cared about, other people cared about, and they could actually achieve it. I think when you can show that, then people are excited to be a part of our organizations.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, what you said made me think about just ABCD, y'all. Like that's a really useful tool too, because you if you can, have circles that are forming around what people are already passionate about, what already
Yeah.
makes them come alive, or, that kind of level of that kind of space to participate, it can be much easier to get people to come to meetings, as Nate's saying, as opposed to, you know, um, like before actually for a long time with neighborhood work, I have always been talking about, okay, I want to move from isolated neighborhood to like some sort of social group, but then I want to move beyond that. We're more than just grilling together, we're co-creating together, right? And how do you, that seemed like the biggest gap. And for me, ABCD is kind of the thing that seems like the best way forward. There is like, if I can just get people gathering to co-create and make decisions and even go to meetings around things they already super love, um, then, maybe we have a better chance then. But also, yeah, just, I think seeking feedback in other ways, if the people don't want to show up there, they don't want to have capacity, just doing what you can to like bring in their feedback. At our last meeting, we had people that were bringing in ideas from all sorts of other neighbors, that didn't show up for whatever reason, but we really tried to be attentive to that as well, and when we could, to loop those concerns into our final decision as well.
All right, so our next question is from DeQuavion. Do you have examples of this practice playing out between institutions, developers, and community members?
Yeah, that's a really good question, DeQuavion. I can't speak from personal experience. Like, I'm not a part of an organization that has officially adopted sociocracy, but I can speak from some of the members of the class that I was in. It was actually amazing because many of them were from other nations. There was a whole contingent in my sociocracy class of individuals from Denmark who were from the same company, and they're doing permaculture work in their community. And it was incredible because they were an institution that said, "Hey, if you're joining our staff, you need to go take this course on how to practice these things with us. We already function this way. You need to learn these skills so that you can join our team." So it was amazing because I was in that course as like, I don't know anything about this. And some people in the course were like, no, I'm doing this for my job. I have to do this for my work. And like, it was amazing. So yes, there are levels to this. And that slide that Ian showed earlier, like everything from education to land management to permaculture to other kinds of co-housing, all these different sectors. There are many, many sectors that use it. both on the institutional level and on the associational level, if you will, of just residents and community members. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's definitely out there. I just had never seen it before, and it's incredible.
Uh, and then I just want to share a real quick screen share thing just to show you something, if that's okay. I think I can. So I'm just looking through an online copy of Many Voices, One Song, and I found this diagram here, which looks super, super confusing. The point is that um, they have there's a whole section on like organization of organization, right? Networks, and how they can be linked. And in the EU and UK, there's something called SONIC, which is sociocratic neighborhood circles, um, and they are learning off of a model in India that is the neighborhood parliaments model, and both of those are bringing in. They're very much multi-stakeholder, and they have kind of found they have a lot more experience with bringing in many, many organizations, voices, all of that. So it definitely can work really well. I just don't like, I could connect you with somebody that would have some really great insight on that question and would probably be happy to meet with you if that's helpful.
Awesome. All right, we've got one more, and then we're going to end with some fun announcements. But last question is, how do you help neighbors see the value of connection and shared power as opposed to instant fast decisions?
Yeah. I think,
That's a
yeah,
good.
I think the my neighbors like actually the connection piece is something that they're like, I mean, besides like the ones that want to get to know neighbors at all, right? Like uh they're looking for the connection. They're a little, the trust level is not there yet where they feel like, hey, we can come to instant fast decisions. Like they want to be building that slow trust. I think a lot of Americans like don't necessarily trust their neighbors enough to want to do shared power with them yet. And so I guess I have my struggle is around how to convince them to do shared power. And again, I think the best thing that I can say is like just trying like mini experiments, small examples in which people get to practice having their voice heard. And like, just if you come to a solution through some of these processes that's super simple. I mean, um, it can be a solution that is like about the next meeting location or whatever. But if you do it right and you feel like you've kind of gone on a journey and created something together, it really can feel very empowering. But then a lot of people just want to go home and watch Netflix, right? So I think just small steps, FaceTime together, doing more social things to build up to that, and then coming around things that people are already really passionate about. That would be like my best approach. I've explored that question in a video or two where I spoke for 50 minutes, trying to answer that question from my own experiences. So happy to share that as well. Um, but that's the best that I got.
Yeah, I'll just respond quickly that you can't hand that to someone and make them value it. But I think everyone has felt the pain points of those who care and those who are trying to do the work. They've felt the pain points of certain models. And I think when you can present them an alternative and say, hey, let's try this, let's see how it goes. And then again, get those small wins, like Ian said, I think that's the opportunity to build that buy-in.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. We're going to send out the recording of our conversation today, along with PowerPoint, a couple of resources mentioned. I know we talked about ABCD or asset-based community development. So if that's a new term for you, we're going to send out an introduction to that as well. But feel free, if you would like to chat more, not only with Nate and Ian, but with other folks who are doing this local relationship-driven work in neighborhoods across the country, go ahead and sign up for the Community Building Hub. That is our online community just for folks doing this work where you can connect, you can ask questions, get real-time insights and feedback from other people who are applying these principles in their community. We also do have another webinar coming up. So next month, I am very excited. We're going to be joined by inclusion seekers. So they're going to come out on August 5th, and they specifically do community building with families that have a member who's a person with disability. And so they're looking at how do we actually build those relationships and that connection among the community and not just with other folks with the same experiences. So they're going to be sharing how their organization made that shift, but also have a few of the families who have been a part of that project to share about what they've been able to do. So that'll be coming up on August 5th. Feel free to go ahead and sign up for that. And we are so looking forward to staying connected with y'all. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you around.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.